The war had shattered everything she once knew. Homes were in ruins, streets were empty, and her heart carried a fear she had never felt before. She was a Christian woman, alone, wounded not just on the outside, but deep within. The sounds of bombs echoed, and she ran, not knowing where safety could be found, not knowing who she could trust. Her feet carried her to a place she never imagined she'd enter. A mosque. She hesitated at the door, unsure, afraid. All her life she had heard stories, most of them filled with fear, suspicion, or misjudgment about Muslims. And now, in her most vulnerable state, she was about to walk into a space that had been painted as the other side. But her heart was desperate, and her soul needed safety. What happened next would change everything she thought she knew. Instead of rejection, she was met with compassion. Instead of judgment, she was met with care. The Muslim women brought her water. One offered her a scarf, another held her hand. No one asked what religion she followed. No one questioned her background. She was human. She was in pain. And that was all that mattered. She watched them pray, silent, calm, bowed in surrender. The rhythm of their voices, the peaceful call to prayer, the simplicity of their devotion. It touched something in her soul that had been silent for years. For the first time in a long time, she felt peace, not from weapons or guards, but from witnessing faith in action. The imam came to speak with her. She expected preaching. Instead, he gave her assurance. He reminded her of shared beliefs, of Jesus, of Mary, of the message of peace. He told her she was honored as a guest, and he meant it. That day, her fear of Islam began to fade. Not because of books or arguments, but because of kindness. Because when the world turned its back, a mosque opened its doors. She walked in broken, she left with questions. And that was the beginning of something beautiful. What happened in that mosque was not just hospitality, it was Islam in its truest form. And it shocked her in the most beautiful way. She never thought a day would come when her life would depend on the very people she had feared. Running through the streets, torn by war, hearing gunshots in the distance, she didn't know where to go. Her church had been destroyed, the aid centers were overwhelmed, and as she wandered through the dust-covered roads, her eyes landed on a building still standing, a mosque. For a moment, she froze. Every image she had seen in the media, every story she had heard, warned her that this was the last place she should be. But something inside her pushed her forward. With trembling steps, she approached the entrance. She expected to be turned away. She expected cold looks or silence. Instead, she was welcomed. The women inside looked at her, not with suspicion, but with concern. One of them gently wrapped a scarf around her, not to change her, but to comfort her. Another brought her warm tea. A third sat beside her without saying a word, simply offering presence in a time of pain. She didn't understand the language fully, but she understood the language of mercy. The mosque was quiet, soft, peaceful, far from the chaos she had just escaped. And in that moment, she realized this was not just a building, it was a refuge. A place that didn't see her religion first, but saw her humanity. The people inside were not enemies. They were not strangers. They were protectors, healers, servants of something greater. That moment shattered every false belief she had carried. The mosque didn't just shelter her body, it began to heal her heart. For the first time, she saw Islam not as a threat, but as a light in the darkness, and it left a mark on her soul that she could never erase. She had never imagined her footsteps would lead her to a mosque, especially in the middle of a war zone. She was a Christian nurse, exhausted, wounded, and carrying more than just physical pain. The chaos around her was deafening, Explosions, cries, shattered buildings, and the heavy silence of loss. Her hospital had collapsed. Her colleagues were gone. She was alone. And in her search for shelter, she saw a building still standing, with tall arches and a quiet presence, a mosque. Her heart hesitated. Everything she had ever seen in the media made her fearful of what was inside. But survival doesn't wait for stereotypes. With trembling steps and a broken spirit, she entered. She expected to be stopped, judged, maybe even turned away. But what happened next shocked her. A group of Muslim women looked up and immediately stood. One rushed to bring her water. Another brought a shawl to cover her cold shoulders. A third guided her gently to sit and rest. No one asked what her religion was. No one cared about where she came from. She was human. She was in pain. And that was enough. She watched them pray, silent, united, full of grace. The sound of the Qur'an, unfamiliar yet soothing, echoed gently through the room. It wasn't aggressive. It wasn't foreign. It was peaceful, beautiful, healing. Later, an elderly woman took her hand and whispered, "You are safe here, my dear." That one sentence melted all her fear. It wasn't preaching, it wasn't conversion. It was compassion. That moment changed everything for her. She saw Islam not through news headlines, but through the mercy of its people. She walked in broken and scared. She walked out with a heart full of questions and, strangely, peace. It wasn't just shelter she found in that mosque. It was truth she had never seen before. She sat quietly in a corner of the mosque, her body wrapped in a blanket someone had placed over her shoulders. The chaos of the war outside felt distant now, muffled by the walls of this unfamiliar place. She was still unsure. She was still afraid. But what she saw next would begin to change something deep inside her. As the call to prayer echoed softly through the space, women began to rise from their places. They stood shoulder to shoulder, forming straight lines, facing one direction. No one spoke. No one moved out of turn. There was unity in their motion, peace in their silence. She had never witnessed anything like it. The prayer began, and the imam's voice reciting the Qur'an filled the mosque. She couldn't understand the words, but something in the tone pierced straight through her heart. It wasn't loud or emotional. It was calm, focused, sincere. As she watched the women bow and then lower themselves into prostration, she felt a strange ache in her chest. It wasn't sadness. It was longing. She had always been told that Islam was rigid, mechanical, even harsh. But this moment was the opposite of everything she expected. These women weren't afraid. They weren't oppressed. They weren't lost. They were connected to something bigger than themselves. There was power in the way they surrendered, peace in the way they prayed. One young girl, maybe 17, noticed her watching and smiled gently after the prayer ended. Without a word, she offered her a prayer mat. The nurse hesitated, then smiled back. That small moment of kindness broke down more walls than any debate ever could. She realized then that she wasn't just observing prayer, she was feeling it. The rhythm, the humility, the complete stillness. It calmed her heart in a way nothing else had. She came looking for shelter, but in that moment she found something she couldn't explain. Not answers, not religion, not yet, but something else, a beginning. She sat quietly in the back corner of the mosque, unsure if she was welcome, unsure if she was even allowed to be there. Just hours before, she had been running through rubble and fire, her nurse uniform torn, her hands trembling. She had treated victims, lost friends, and barely escaped with her own life. And now, the only building still standing was this mosque. She had never stepped into one before. She was a Christian, And everything she had ever heard about Islam made her nervous, but when she entered, bleeding and afraid, no one asked where she came from or what she believed. They just helped her. Now, wrapped in a warm shawl, she watched in silence as the Muslim women around her began to stand for prayer. One by one, they lined up, calm, focused, and at peace. The call to prayer had just echoed through the space, and as the Imam's voice began reciting from the Qur'an, she felt something stir deep inside her. She didn't understand the words, but the tone, the humility, the stillness, it all felt so powerful. She had been told Islam was harsh, distant, even cold, but what she was witnessing was gentle, intimate, and filled with sincerity. As the women bowed and went into prostration, she saw no fear, only connection. They weren't performing a ritual. They were praying with purpose, surrendering to something far beyond themselves. One young girl noticed her watching and smiled. After prayer, she quietly handed her a small prayer rug. The nurse smiled back, holding it close. Not as a Muslim, not yet, but as someone touched by kindness. That moment shifted something in her heart. For the first time in a long time, she felt safe, not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually. She hadn't found answers, but she had found peace. And for now, that was enough. She had always believed that actions speak louder than words, and in that mosque, she saw Islam not through debates or arguments, but through quiet, powerful acts of kindness. No one handed her a pamphlet. No one lectured her about theology. No one even asked her to convert. Instead, they showed her what Islam looked like in real life. It was in the way a woman offered her bread before eating her own. It was in the way a young boy brought her clean water without being told. It was in the way the Imam lowered his voice and looked into her eyes with sincerity when he said, "You are our guest. Your safety is our duty." These moments didn't require translation. They didn't need explanation. They spoke for themselves. And slowly she began to realize that everything she had feared about Muslims was built on noise. Loud voices, loud headlines, loud opinions. But here, in this place, everything was quiet, pure, real. Islam wasn't being preached at her, it was being lived in front of her. These were people under fire, people who had also lost family and homes, and yet they still made space for a stranger. They treated her not as a threat, but as someone worthy of care and dignity. There was no pressure, no hidden agenda, just genuine humanity. It was as if the walls of the mosque themselves whispered a message. This is who we are, not what the world says we are. She began to reflect deeply. Was it possible she had judged an entire faith based on shadows, while the light had always been there, waiting to be seen? That day, her heart softened, not because of a powerful argument, but because of powerful mercy. For the first time, she saw that Islam wasn't just a religion, it was a way of living, with compassion, honor, and responsibility. The kindness she received, the dignity she was shown, the quiet service she witnessed, all of it opened a new window in her soul. She had come to escape war, but what she found in that mosque was far more powerful. She found truth in action, and it touched her heart in a way she never expected. She entered that mosque with fear in her heart and confusion in her mind, but what she experienced inside planted something deep within her, a seed of unexpected clarity. The next morning, after spending a night surrounded by strangers who treated her like family, She asked one of the women a question that had been burning in her mind all night. "Can I read your holy book?" There was no shock, no hesitation. A copy of the Qur'an, translated in her language, was gently placed in her hands. She held it carefully, not sure what to expect. The moment she opened its pages, she felt something shift. The verses weren't written like commands from a distant God. They felt like conversations. Passages about mercy, justice, patience, and truth began to speak to parts of her soul that had been silent for years. She found the name of Jesus mentioned repeatedly, not in conflict with Islam, but honored. Mary was described with more detail and respect than she had ever seen before. It wasn't what she expected at all. There was no hostility toward her beliefs. In fact, she felt her faith being expanded, not erased. She wasn't reading the Qur'an as someone ready to convert. She was reading as someone ready to understand. And that changed everything. As she continued, she found tears forming in her eyes, not from confusion or guilt, but from a sense of peace she had not felt in a very long time. For years, her heart had been clouded by fear and filtered information. But in that quiet mosque, with the Qur'an resting in her lap and the echoes of prayer still fresh in the air, she realized something profound. She had been taught to fear what she never truly knew. The war had brought destruction, but it also brought her to a doorway she would never have approached otherwise. She entered the mosque just seeking shelter. She left carrying something far more powerful. Questions that felt like answers, doubts that transformed into curiosity, and a book that no longer seemed foreign. She didn't walk out a Muslim, but she walked out changed. And the journey had only just begun. She entered the mosque seeking nothing but shelter. But what she found was a reflection of true Islam. Kindness, mercy, and humanity. The people inside didn't ask her who she was, what faith she followed, or why she came. They saw her pain and they responded with compassion. No arguments, no pressure. Just silent service that spoke louder than any words ever could. What touched her most wasn't just the safety she found, but the peace that settled into her heart. The Qur'an, once a mystery to her, became a source of curiosity. The call to prayer, once foreign, became something she longed to hear again. And the people she once feared, they became her first real example of faith in action. She left the mosque with more than protection. She left with questions, with clarity, and with a heart that felt seen. To every viewer watching, thank you for taking this journey. If this story moved you, share it. Let the world see the Islam that is rarely shown, soft, sincere, and deeply human. Subscribe for more stories like this. And let's keep spreading truth, love, and light. May your heart always stay open to what you never expected.